Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to do another video on water preparedness because it's been a while since I've done one. And so I'm just going to kind of give you a brief run through of what we do ourselves, give you a few ideas and suggestions, and show a few images of things that I collected from the internet, just so you can have it in one place that might give you some different ideas, because there's not one best way for everyone, just like anything else, because the space you have, where you live, and the availability of water, these are all factors that you're going to have to take into consideration, even if you already have a well, because you never know what could happen to that well. So water is a very important resource that most of us already know, but it can be a difficult one when we think about how you're going to store it, what is a good renewable resource, and more. Starting off with what we do is one of the blessings of living in a place that, though we have short growing seasons and it can be really dreary and wet all the time, is we have an abundance of water that falls from the sky. But we have had in the summertime actual dry summers for 3 months. It doesn't happen every year. It's a little more rare, but it can happen, and we can have a pretty dry season, surprisingly, here. Even though we live just right down the road from a rainforest, water can become a little bit scarce and things can start drying out. So making the most of that rainwater is one of the ways that we're looking out for not just water storage, but having a renewable resource, because renewable resources are important. It's just like food. You think about, oh, I got to go buy this food or that food or can this or can that, but eventually your food sources can still dry up. So growing a garden is a way that you can add to that. And if things work out well and you have the space, you may be eventually able to live entirely off what you can grow in your garden or raise in your pasture. So the same applies to water, and especially with how difficult it can be to store. Now, I'm not going to go over all of the details on how we collect rainwater and filter it, because I have a separate video I did on that I'll link to in the description box down below. It's 2 or 3 years old now, but we're still doing it the same way. And so we collect the rainwater we get, we store it. We have, as far as above ground goes, we have 2 55-gallon drums. That's where the water collects into. We have the first flush tank, and then the second tank is where we draw the water for drinking. That then gets run through a filtering system that I then store in 1-gallon glass jugs. These are just recycled wine jugs that I've collected through the years from various different sources. And I just like using a stopper on them. It makes it easier. And then I rotate through them. So again, more details in that video if you want to learn about that. But even though we have lots of water almost always coming in, because we have those months that can get really dry, I have about 30 days worth of drinking water stored up at any given time, or at least I try to, that's ready to go, that's already filtered. And then we also have some underground tanks that we store water in. So I know we have well over 2,000 gallons worth of water storage, rainwater storage. And then another thing that we did, since we have a couple other pieces of property, we did purchase a couple of years ago a milk tank, and that is something, it's all stainless steel, so that's something we're going to be putting out on our farther out piece of property out of town, and we're going to be using that to store rainwater in as well out there, because again, even though we get so much rain at least 9 months out of the year, especially in the spring and in the fall, having some storage to get us through those dry months is really important, because it's not even just about the water you need to drink, it's about water to wash with, water to water your animals with, and water for watering your gardens with. So this is why, even with all this rain, we have put a focus on so much water storage. Now, I realize that our own situation isn't going to work for everyone. Some of you are in an apartment or renting. You don't have the space to have rainwater catchment systems or store water. So that was one of the purposes of this, is I wanted to give you a few ideas. Now, while buying bottled water might be a good place to start for some, that is certainly not a place to finish. That would be something to have on hand for a 24 to 72 hour emergency backup. But you need to look at something more serious and something that isn't stored in that kind of plastic, because especially sitting for a long period of time in plastic, if it ever freezes or warms up, that plastic in those particular types of bottles can leach toxins into your water. So it's not the best option, but at least it is a place to start if you have to, if that's all you have right now. Go down to Costco or Walmart or wherever your local, inexpensive place is. And then I just ask at least read the ingredients, because some of the bottled waters out there, they're adding stuff that does not need to be in there. Some of the things I've seen through the years that people with limited space have done for water storage is actually getting the tanks, and yes, they're plastic too, but usually it's a safer plastic, and they will actually store that, make that be their whole underbed storage. And so then they put their mattresses on top of those. And they might even have to climb up a ladder to get to the top, to the bed. But that is one way you can make quite a bit of use out of that space under your bed. I mean, there's lots of, depending on how tall your bed is anyway, there's lots of storage you can do under there. In fact, another video I'd like to link you to is that I did a few years ago was small space food storage, or ideas if you have small spaces. And one of the ideas in there, I'll put this picture here again, was like some people just basically making this underbed storage where you can just lift the bed up, a lot like you might see in a camp trailer. But it might even have, depending on how tall the bed is, you might even be able to make a lot more storage under there. So even if you wanted to store water in glass jugs like this, you could put quite a few jugs in there, plus some food storage and more. Now, some things that people may not think about is if they already have like in-ground or above-ground swimming pools or jacuzzis, these can be at least a source of water. And it might sound nasty, but as long as you have, just like the rainwater that comes off our roof, there's going to be bird poop, pollen, toxins from the air, and whatever is being sprayed out there. You still need to have a way to clean that. So it's not any different than taking the water from your swimming pool or your jacuzzi and then filtering it or doing whatever you find, reverse osmosis, whatever works best for you to be able to have that water. If nothing else, these swimming pools, if you have the space for one, it can be kind of a more covert way to have water storage, and you can use that for watering your gardens with and more. And then there's all kinds of different types of totes, barrels, and ways that you can set that up for rainwater. One of the ones I saw that I hadn't personally seen this until I started looking into it was you can get some actual, long, narrow type tanks that you can put along. If you have like a narrow pathway between your house and maybe the fence or the house next door, you can put these tanks in there and you'd still have room to walk by them. So I thought that was pretty cool, because some of the other tanks out there wouldn't work with some people who have such limited space to work with, but these narrow ones, I'm not sure where you can find them. I just recommend doing a search and seeing they're out there somewhere. But also know that any of your totes, like the tanks that we have in the ground that we buried, and we do have one tote. We got those all from the same source. We found, I can't remember what we paid for it because it was quite a number of years ago, but we found them on, it was either on, I think it was on Facebook Market. Somebody was, they live in Washington State. They were a few hours away, but they actually were willing to drive them out here. And so they drove them out here, we bought them. The only bad thing was the tote that we got, and this is one of the things you have to be careful with, is the guy that we bought it from wasn't totally honest about that. He made it sound like it had been used for food. That's what you want to look for, is whenever you're purchasing tanks, like the blue tanks that we have for the water collection, those were actually used for peach schnapps. They weren't used for some toxic chemical. We did still wash them out really good, but even then, the first water that we were getting out of there still smelled like peach schnapps. It didn't taste like it, but we still had that smell of peach schnapps, which wasn't a bad smell, but it took a while to get that out. So you don't want to have tanks that any kind of toxic chemicals had been stored in, because that can get into that plastic and it can take a very long time to get out. So when we got that tank, Patrick was pretty disappointed that it had a strong chemical smell. And, you know, even though the guide said it had been used, it had been a food tank. But we still took it, and, you know, Patrick washed it out real good. We've allowed rainwater to flush through there again and again and again to help flush out the chemicals and get the smell out. And then we moved it out, actually moved it out to our other piece of property just down the road to use that for rainwater collection there, because, you know, we are kind of working on expanding our gardening out that way. We did recently plant some raspberries there. We may be putting a high tunnel out there that we already have. We just need the material to cover it with. We have the frame, and it's really huge, and that might be where we decide to put that. We're still contemplating if that's the best place, but either way, we're still going to need some kind of water collection out there, because there's no water hookup, so there is no public, like here we still can get public water where we're at here in our home. We just rely, at least for consuming water, we rely on the water that we store and filter ourselves. But in the event that something happens, which has happened, we've had water shut off many times through the whole area because of main breaks and whatnot. We always have water on hand. It's just not an issue. We have water to wash with, to drink, to make our coffee with, soups and more. But at both of our other pieces of property, we have creeks that run through there. And these can also be sources of water collection besides rain. But creeks can run dry, but still having a tote out there near the garden area would be a lot easier than having to constantly pack water up from the creek. And so that was one of the plans that we have for that tote there. So, you know, these are all just some of the different things that you can consider. As far as the storage itself, in order to keep, you know, some people get really concerned about algae and whatever can grow in the water and going bad. Now, some people have resorted to actually canning water. So every time they're running their canner, if they have any space in the canner, they'll take some jars, fill them up with water, and then can that water, and it seals and, you know, all that. And that can last for a very long time. And that's a decent idea. You can only can, you know, up to quart-sized jars doing that. However, what I do is, like I said, I always rotate through our water, so it's never a concern. And we keep our jugs of water that we're not using. They stay in dark rooms. Why just rotate through all of those? Every day, almost every day. Every time I go get water, I might have 2, even 3 jugs to fill at a time. I go out there, I rotate everything. So everything's going to stay as fresh as possible. But if you're looking at storing, you know, and just storing in a cool, dark place, it will keep that water fresh for a very long time. I'm talking maybe even a year or 2. But if it gets really warm in any room in your house, you may still want to look at adding something to that water that is healthy. You know, some people might even put a couple drops of iodine in there. You can also even put something that I really can't talk about, but I'll give you the initials. It starts with a C and an S. It is a precious metal that can help keep that water clean. I don't do that because that can also kill the beneficial bacteria you may need if you're going to go do fermenting with that. So I don't like to use that in my water that I use for storage, because I'm always fermenting. I'm making vinegar with it. I'm making homemade wines. I'm doing all kinds of fermenting related projects with the water we collect. So I don't want anything in there that's going to kill any active cultures that could be present, because I'm going to need those for the fermentation process. So that's just something to consider. However, if you're looking at long term and you're not worried about that, those are a couple of options you can put into the water that will be safe and actually even healthy for you. And then, but you know, I do use the CS in the stainless steel water bottles that I keep in our go bags. And it is kept, sometimes that water can sit in those stainless steel bottles in the rigs for a year or more. And I've drank that water and it is still good because of that addition. So there's a few ideas there, and what I'm hoping is that there'll be plenty enough people that will come in and share some of their own ideas or things that they've learned, even if you haven't implemented it yet, just something you're considering, some things you've looked into that maybe I didn't mention. Put those in comments down below, and that way people can have some more ideas to work off of and to consider what's going to work best for them, whether it be because they have a small space or because of maybe the state they live in and certain laws, and maybe they're not into the civil disobedience thing or whatever. I mean, or they're just wanting to find a way to be a little more covert about what they're doing. So yeah, share your ideas and thoughts down below so people can learn from you as well. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.